So if we're doing the distance for example 1, we've got a big square root. And we're going to subtract our x's. So the formula actually says second x minus first x. So what number would be the second x? Negative 6. So can y'all do that in your head? Negative 6 minus 4. Negative 6 minus 4 is negative 10. And then according to the formula, you have to square that number. Plus your second y. Your second y is going to be 3. Minus your first y is going to be negative 1. What's 3 minus negative 1? 3 minus a negative 1, 4. Okay, and then you're going to square that. Usually by this point, you're doing some adding and subtracting in your head. Some of you might even be able to square those in your head. So that's going to end up being 100 plus 16. So that's going to be the square root of 116. Your directions say find the distance between each pair of points. If necessary, round to 2 decimal places. Okay, so the square root of 116 is not a perfect square. If I had to simplify it without a decimal, I would take a 4 out. Why would I take a 4 out? Because 4 is a perfect square. And if they wanted the answer not in decimal form, I just want to show you what that would look like. That would be 2 square root of 29. If they want the answer not in decimal form, which could be possible that the directions say that, okay? And then if they want it in decimal form, you can just go back to 116 and use your calculator. The square root of 116, I'll just go back to 116. It says round to 2 decimal places. That gives me 10 point what? 777. Okay? Be prepared to give a simplified radical answer like 2 squared 29, and then also be prepared to round to 2 decimal places. You may see either one of those answers or be asked for either one of those. All right, example 2 is going to be a little bit harder because of the decimals. So I might use my calculator here, but I'm not going to write down every step. Okay, so I'm going to do second x, that's negative 0.5 minus the first x. What's negative 0.5 minus 3.5? Negative 4. The distance formula says after you subtract your x's, you're going to square that, and then you're going to add, and then you're going to do 6.2, your second y, minus your first y. That's going to also, or excuse me, not also, but that's going to give you a negative 2. And then I could probably do negative 4 squared in my head. That's 16. Negative 2 squared is 4. 16 plus 4 is 20. So I'd get the square root of 20. If they wanted an estimated decimal, I could go ahead and take the square root of 20 here. And rounded to the hundredths would be 4 point what? 47. If they wanted a simplified radical answer, what goes into 20 that's a perfect square? 4. So 4 times 5 is 20, and the simplified radical form would be 2 square root of 5. How can these distance problems get harder? They can get harder if they put decimals in them or even if they put square roots in there. Okay? So example 3, the second x is negative square root of 3. You can think of that as like a negative 1 square root of 3 minus the first x is 3 square root of 3. So what's negative 1 square root of 3 minus 3 square root of 3? Negative 4 square root of 3. So that's negative 4 square root of 3 squared plus, we're going to subtract our y's, so we have a 4 square root of 5 minus an understood 1 square root of 5. 4 square root of 5 minus 1 square root of 5 is 3 square root of 5. And when we square negative 4 square root of 3, we have to square the negative 4, and then we have to square the square root of 3, and then we have to multiply those together. So negative 4 squared is 16. Square root of 3 squared is 3. 16 times 3 is 48. 3 square root of 5 squared. 3 squared is 9. Square root of 5 squared is 5. 9 times 5 is 45. So you get the square root of 48 plus 45, which combines to be 93. The square root of 93 is simplified as far as a radical form. Nothing goes into 93 that's a perfect square as far as I know. and then you would use your calculator to give a rounded decimal answer. 9.64. Everybody knows those two squiggly lines. They're not equal signs anymore because you've actually rounded. You don't have an exact answer. So the square root of 93 doesn't equal 9.64. That's why they changed those straight equal signs to squiggly lines, meaning it's approximately equal to 9.74 because you've rounded. All right, any questions about distance formula? You will have to know this formula. It will not be written on your quiz Wednesday. So distance is the square root of your x's subtracted squared plus your y subtracted squared. And the little ones and the twos, that just means you got to subtract in the same order. So if you do second x minus first x, you have to do second y minus first y. If you do first x minus second x, you got to do first y minus second y. Questions about the distance formula? All right, midpoint formula is a little less complicated, but sometimes we get distance and midpoint confused. So if I'm giving two ordered pairs and they're asking me to find the middle point, which is called the midpoint, I like to memorize this formula because it's like you're averaging the x's. Think about why the formula is like you're averaging the x's. Y'all get that? x1 plus x2 divided by 2. Is that not how you would average two things? You add them up and you average them. So we want the average of the x's and the average of the y's, and that gives us the middle point, which is really considered the average. So you're going to add your x's. Negative 3 plus 6 in your head is 3, and then you're going to divide by 2. Lots of times they'll just leave that as a reduced fraction. You're going to add up your y's. Negative 4 plus negative 8 is negative 12. So then you would have negative 12 divided by 2, but negative 12 divided by 2 will reduce. So your final answer will be the ordered pair 3/2 comma negative 6. You could also graph these 2 points if you wanted to. You could actually visually find the midpoint. If you totally forget the midpoint formula, just say, hey, can I get a piece of graph paper? You could actually graph the 2 points and just find the middle between the 2 points, the ordered pair of the middle point, okay, just in case that you totally freak out. Example 5, if you add your x's, what's negative 2/5 plus negative 2/5? Negative 4/5, and then we have to divide by 2. We'll talk about that in a minute. Negative 4/5 divided by 2. Add your y's. 7/15 plus negative 4/15 is 3/15 divided by 2. Okay, can't leave our answer like that because those are fractions and fractions. So tell me a quick way to divide by 2. It's a quick way to divide by 2. Dividing by 2 is really multiplying by 1/2. Dividing by 2 is really multiplying by 1/2. So I really want you to visually see this. Negative 4/5 divided by 2 is really negative 4/5 times 1/2. I'd like for you to see that in your head. That's going to give you what? Negative 4/10, which will reduce, okay? And 3/15 divided by 2 is really 3/15 times 1/2, which would really be 3/30. Right? And then those reduce to negative 2/5 and 1/10. You can use your calculator if you want to. You could do negative 4/5 divided by 2. That's going to take you all the way down to the reduced negative 2/5. But you should be able to do some of this in your head. When you get to pre-cal, we deal with fractions all the time. And that's one of the hardest parts about pre-cal, is that they're not very good with fractions, and what we do with pre-cal, we can't always use our calculator on. We have to kind of go back to doing the fractions in our head. All right, any questions about the distance formula or the midpoint formula? All right, circles. This is what most people, just honestly, I don't know if you did these in honors geometry. You're going to be able to tell me once I start, but I'm just going to explain this like you've never seen it before. So the directions say write the standard form of the equation of the circle. There are equations that make circles, if you did not know that. The standard form is written out for you. So here's the standard form. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Looks pretty complicated. The C stands for what? Do you guess? Circle. Try again. Good guess. What do all circles have? Centers. So the C stands for center of your circle. That's confusing, right? C is center. I bet you know what the R stands for. Radius. So your center of your circle is the ordered pair H, comma, K. And if you'll notice, in your equation, you have a minus H and you have a minus K. And so right here, this H is negative, and when it comes out, it is positive. In the equation y minus k squared, the k is negative, and when it comes out, it changes signs and becomes positive. So one of the things that you need to remember is when you pull your h and your k out of your equation, or you put those back into the equation, those numbers always change signs. And then the equation of the circle is always equal not to the radius, but the radius squared. So they're going to start by giving us the center, and they're going to ask us, and the radius, and they're going to ask us to write the equation. So we have to have the x. The formula says subtract your h. Well, your h is your negative 2, and your k is your positive 3. So if I do x minus a negative 2, that's really x plus 2. So what the equation does, the standard form does, is it changes that h value when you put it in the equation or when you take it out. And then the formula of the circle says plus y minus your k value. So that's just going to be minus 3 squared equals your radius squared, and 5 squared is 25. So all you're doing on this first part is given the center of your circle and the length of the radius, you're writing the equation for the circle. In example 7, your h is 0 and your k is negative 1. So we're going to do x minus the h value, so that's x minus 0 squared, plus y minus your k. So when you do y minus the negative 1, that becomes y plus 1 squared. And then what happens when you square the square root of 3? It just becomes a 3. So when you square the radius, you just get the number 3. Now, you're probably not going to see x minus 0 squared, because x minus 0 is really just an x, and so you'll see the answer as x squared plus y plus 1 squared equals 3. So the equation of a circle is x minus the h, that's the first value in the center of the coordinate for the center, squared, plus y minus the k value squared equals the radius squared. So that's writing some equations. Does anybody remember circles from honors geometry? No. All right, let's graph some circles. It says give the center. You're going to look at the equation. It's going to already be in standard form. You're going to determine what the center is. You're going to determine what the radius is, and you're going to sketch out your graph of your circle. These are circles, by the way, because they have x squareds and y squareds. None of our 8 graphs that we practiced at the beginning of the block today had x squareds and y squared. So that's what makes this a circle, and we'll talk about other graphs that go along with circles, but we're just reviewing circles because supposedly you did that in geometry. All right? So I'm just going to tell you that the center is 0, 0, and the radius is 7. Anybody know how I determined that the center is 0, 0, and the radius is 7? Okay, so if you just have a little x squared and you don't have a binomial squared, then that means that your h value is 0. If you just have a y squared and you don't have a y in a binomial squared, there's a number with it, that means that your k value is 0. So that's how I know that the center of my circle that I'm going to graph is 0, 0. How did I know that the radius was 7? Right, because 49 is the radius squared. So in order to find the radius, you have to take the square root of 49. So remember, these are your notes. You can write anything on them that you want. So you're taking the square root of 49. That's how you're getting the 7. All right, so to sketch out a circle, it's fairly simple. You're going to graph the center of your circle first. It's at 0, 0. And a circle is the same distance every single place on the circle from the center, and that distance is 7. That's why it's called the radius. You're going to go to the right 7, up 7, left 7, and down 7. So you're going to make 4 points. To the right 7, make a point. Up 7, make a point. To the left 7, make a point. Down 7, make a point. And I don't know why it is so difficult to graph a circle, but people usually complain about it. So I start to sketch it, unless you're just really good at drawing. And it's supposed to look like a circle, not a squash square. Yeah. Yeah, a diamond is a squash square. No diamond. No diamond. It's close enough. Okay, example 9. The center is not at 0, 0 anymore. Okay, because I have that +1 with my x, I'm going to have to change the sign. It's not going to be a +1, but it's going to be a -1. So we'll move this up so we can see it. So my center is going to be at not +1, but -1, comma, not -4, but +4. You always change the signs according to the equation of the circle when you pull the numbers out or when you put the numbers in. And then the radius is going to be the square root of 1, and the square root of 1 is 1. So this one's going to be a tiny little circle. The center's not going to be at 0, 0. It's going to be at -1, 4. So the centers of the circles are not always at the origin. I'm going to make my point a little bit smaller here. -1, 4. My center's going to be there. To the left 1 and up 4. And then from the center, the radius is, the circle is equidistant all the way around. That's what makes it a circle, not a diamond and not a squash square. So from the center to the right 1, up 1, left 1, and down 1. And then you'll just sketch in your little baby circle. And if the radius is smaller, it's much easier to draw. Don't y'all agree that one was much easier to draw than example 8? Yeah. If the radius is longer, it makes it harder to make that perfect circle. Just do the best you can. By the way, we have totally forgotten about domain and range. So we didn't do that on number 8, but let's do it on number 9. Yes, circles have domain and range. So the domain of my circle, how far to the left does the circle go? -2. It's a solid circle, so I would use a bracket. And then my x's go all the way to the right to what x value? 0. And that circle is solid again, and that's why I'm using a bracket. And I do have a range on my points of my circles. What's the lowest y value? 3. So be bracket 3 all the way to the highest y value of 5. I've already erased my graph for 8, but I know that you already have 8 there, so let's do domain and range for 8 real quick. What's the domain for the graph of number 8? -7 to +7, and the range -7 to +7. Do you think the domain and the range will always be the same if the center of the circle is at the origin? Yes, it will be. The domain and the range will always be the same if the center of the circle is at the origin. That's not true if the center of the circle is not at the origin. All right, example 10, same thing. The equation of the circle is already there for you. You're supposed to tell me what the center is. 0, 2. And then the radius is not going to be a whole number. That's okay, because we have a calculator, and we will estimate what the square root of 5 is to the nearest 10th. It's about 2.2. Does everybody understand why the center is at 0, 2? Everybody understand why the radius is approximately 2.2? So you're going to graph your center, 0 up 2, and then you're just going to estimate here. We can't perfectly graph 2.2, but we're just going to go 2 and a little bit. To the right, up, left, and down. 2 and a little bit. 2 and a little bit. And then we're going to sketch in our circle. Then we're going to state the domain and the range. This might be a little bit harder, but use that 2.2. Although our graph is not completely accurate, use the 2.2. How far to the left does the graph go? Negative 2.2. And how far to the right? Positive 2.2. And we're using brackets and not parentheses because I don't have any open circles anywhere, and I actually do have x values of negative 2.2 and positive 2.2. And how low does this graph go? Negative 0.2. And how high does it go? Positive 4.2. All right, last thing. The directions say complete the square and write the equation in standard form. Then give the center and the radius of your circle and graph. So we're going to use something that I told you that we would use later on. It's called completing the square. We did that back in quadratic equations, and y'all just loved completing the square. And I'm being sarcastic. I'm going to slide this up. All right, so we have a discombobulated equation. It's just in a horrible shape. There's no way for me to find the center or the radius, so I have to put my equation in standard form. I know this is a circle because it has an x squared and a y squared, unlike any other graph I've ever graphed. So I know it's a circle, but it's just not in very good shape. I've got to put it in a shape where I can find the center and the radius. So the first thing that you're going to do is that you're going to write your x squared. It always comes first. And then if you have an x term, just a plain x, you're going to write it next. So that's going to be plus 8x. And then if you have a y squared term, and you will, if this is a circle, you'll have a y squared term. You may or may not have a y term, but you have to have an x squared and a y squared. But you don't have to have an x and a y term, but you have an 8x and you have a 4y here. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to match up. You're going to have an x squared term, and if you have an x term, it'll come second. Then third will come the y squared, and then if you have a y term, it will come next. And then you're going to say, Red Rover, send the constant right over. And if I send positive 16 over to the other side, it is going to become negative 16. And we're going to go through that process that we use for solving quadratic equations called completing the square. Okay, we're going to have to do it with the x's, and we're also going to have to do it with the y's. Okay, what's the number in front of the x? Just a plain x term. 8. That process says 8 divided by 2 is 4. You're not finished. 4 squared is 16. So when we complete the square, we take the number in front of the x, we divide it by 2, we get 4, we square it, and we get 16. So now I'm going to make a trinomial with my x's. I'm going to have x squared plus 8x plus 16. Now I'm going to look at my y terms. I'm going to bring down my y squared, and I'm going to bring down my plus 4y. And now I'm going to look at the number in front of the y term. What number's in front of just the plain y? 4. And I'm going to complete the square with a 4. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4. So I'm going to add 4. So what I have here is I'm going to underline my trinomials. I have 2 trinomials that are about to factor into binomial squares because they're perfect square trinomials because you made them that way. All right, let's talk about the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, I have negative 16, but something changed on the left-hand side. I added 2 numbers. What 2 numbers did I add? 16 and 4. So I added a total of 20 to the left, and if you add something to the left, you have to add the same thing to the right. So I'm going to add 20 to the right to balance my equation. You added 16 and 4, which is 20 to the left. You have to add 20 to the right. Now, each trinomial will factor into a binomial squared. What is x squared plus 8x plus 16 factored? X plus 4 squared, or x plus 4 times x plus 4. And then y squared plus 4y plus 4 factored is y plus 2 binomial squared. Simplify the right-hand side and you get 4. So now you have a nice little equation that's all cleaned up that is in standard form. So x plus 4 squared plus y plus 2 squared equals 4. That's your equation in standard form. When it's in standard form, you can actually find things. Kind of like when your room is cleaned up, you can actually find things like you've never seen in like 2 months. So the center of your circle would be what? -4, -2, and your radius would be square root of 4, which would be 2. Okay, all you need to graph a circle is the center and its radius. So we graph our center first, left 4, down 2. And then our radius is 2. So from our center, we're going to go right 2, up 2, left 2, down 2, sketch in our circle. And I don't think they're asking you for domain and range here. They're just asking you to put the equation in standard form. All right. You want to walk back through what we did first? What did we do in the first line? You put your x's together, you put your y's together, and then you sent the constant to the other side. The positive 16 then became -16. Then you did 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. You added 16 to the x squared plus 8x. And then you did 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4. And you added the 4. And then you have to remember, this is what a lot of people forget, you just added 16 and 4 to the left-hand side, so that means you added 20 to the left, so you got to turn around and add 20 to the right. And then each trinomial factors into a binomial squared, and the two numbers on the right combine to be 4. Questions about that process? We take a whole chapter and we study circles and ellipses and hyperbolas and different types of parabolas that you haven't seen before, and we'll do that later. But right now, for some reason, they threw circles into chapter 2, and that's why we're covering them. All right, last example. You tell me what we're going to do first. You can walk me through this one. X squared minus x plus y squared plus 2y. Red rubber, send the constant right over, and once it moves over to the right-hand side, it becomes negative. Now, I chose this one, made this one a little bit harder. Who can tell me why it's a little bit harder? Because when you complete the square with your x's, you're going to end up with a fraction. Okay, so what's the number in front of your x? An understood -1, so you're going to do -1 divided by 2, which you can't divide -1 by 2. That's okay. Remember, you're not just going to leave it as a fraction. Don't put it into a decimal, and then you're going to square it. So what's -1/2 squared? +1/4. So your trinomial is going to be x squared minus x plus 1/4. That's going to be your trinomial with your x's. Your y's won't be as hard. So you're going to do y squared plus 2y. You're going to take your 2, divide it by 2, and square it, and you're going to get close. 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. And then this is the part we can't forget. We have to balance. So what did we add on the left in total? 1 and 1/4. So I've got to add 1 and 1/4 to the right. Now each trinomial will factor. So the first trinomial factors into x plus or minus? Minus. Why minus? You take the sign of the middle term. Square root of 1/4 is 1/2. So you get x minus 1/2 squared plus, what's the next binomial? y plus 1, and then negative 1 and 1 1/4 combined to be 1/4. So that's the algebra part. You got your nice little equation in standard form. What's the center of your circle? Positive 1/2, negative 1. Your radius is the square root of 1/4, so your radius would be 1/2. So this is going to be a tiny little circle. A tiny little circle. It may be hard for me to draw, but I'll do the best I can on this iPad. So we have a center to the right 1/2 and down 1. To the right 1/2 and down 1. And then we go right 1/2 a unit, up 1/2 a unit, left 1/2 a unit, and down 1/2 a unit. So kind of probably impossible for y'all to see, but we'll just use our imagination here. Probably just going to look like a blob to you, but